All right. Hey, we're live. Hello, good people. Hi, it's Jason with Green Country Agroforestry. Um, we're here on what day is today? Wednesday, the 6th of April, I guess it is. Wow, 7:30. It's still bright outside, but I know it's going to get dark here pretty soon. That's why we're indoors and not out enjoying the new grape arbor. We'll probably move out there here in another week or two. If it's still bright outside, about 8:30 in the evening, we'll start doing the live streams outside, which will be kind of fun. Of course, the topic today is what if everything goes right? What if everything works out just fine? What if we're okay? What if it's not the end of the world as we know it? Or it is the end of the world as we know it, but it's okay because a new world, a better world is coming for us. And that's what we're going to be walking into and experience. As you come in, whether you're watching live or you're just watching on the replay, I'd like for you to just stop for a moment and either put in the comments down below or in the live chat over there to the side, what you're prepping for, if anything. I mean, some people are prepping for economic collapse. Some people are prepping for coronal mass ejection or solar flares, or same thing, isn't it? or EMPs, loss of the power grid. All a different variety of things that people have been preparing for, getting ready for, and really many of us just prep as a matter of course. We call it country living. Here in Oklahoma, it's not uncommon for us to go without power for days or even weeks or shoot, months at a time, depending upon where you're at. So prepping is not necessarily an unusual thing for country folk. Let me just take a look and see what people are typing in chat already. Brian says, your keyboard to God's ears? Yeah, absolutely. Sassafras Red says he's always waking up to a bright new day. Vicky is wishing us many blessings and is prepping for her eventual inability to be productive. You know, that's something we should all be prepping for. In all actuality, it's almost guaranteed at some point in the future, all of us are not going to be able to get out there and work a job or till a field or do the things that we can do whenever we're still fairly young and in fairly decent shape. I know my shoulders they're getting bad. I wake up in the middle of the winter and my hips have arthritis in it. Sometimes I can't stand up without the use of a cane. So I know that day is coming for me. And in reality, it's coming for all of us, that day that we aren't going to be able to be productive. Arkansas woodcutter Mark says a new world is coming. Amen. Amy says, hello. Fishes and Love Slice says, interesting topic. I believe, yeah, you did, Carol. It was just the other day. I said, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing because it's been on my mind. What if everything turns out just fine? And I don't want to go too much into the Bible here because I know not all my viewers are people who read that particular book. But for those who are, and there's a great number who are, there's a promise in that book about a better world to come. And I'm thinking maybe what we should be focusing our attention and energy on is preparing for that particular world. And I'm not talking about some sort of mystical, wonderful place that we all get to go to that's a paradise when we die. I'm talking about the new world that will come into being here on Earth that we'll experience as we live. Incidentally, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then go back and reread that book, particularly the part where Rabbi Yeshua Bar Joseph was talking about the good news of the kingdom. He was talking about a kingdom here on Earth. Again, Jenny says, prepping for security and to provide for the family and hopefully have enough to help friends and neighbors if it comes to that. Being able to help friends and neighbors is also something we probably should be prepping for all the time anyway. I'm thinking. We're having tea tonight. It's some green tea with cinnamon and honey. Hopefully it'll help with reducing the old fat roll there. Amy says that her cane has been her best friend for a few months. Mm-hmm. I keep a good walking stick handy at all times. I've got one right here. This is was one of my walking sticks. We keep that handy. Although mainly I use that for working with the trees and the vines. It's useful for reaching up there and grabbing them and pulling them down. Sasspress Red says, we prep for the future. We may not be in that future, but our plants, oh yeah, the plants and the trees, everything that you plant is going to keep on going. I can't recall who it was that said, but someone said that a great civilization is one that plants trees that their grandchildren will taste the fruit of and play under. I'm thinking that we should be working towards building that great society. Vicky says that same book warns us that the earth will be so devastated that the days were not shortened, no life would survive. Well, that's the Revelation. That's John on Patmos. That's speaking there. John has some interesting ideas because he saw it coming, right? He saw what was happening all around him. He was one of those disciples of Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef, and he saw that the doctrine was changing. When the rabbi was around, he was talking about the kingdom of heaven being present, being at hand. It was something that the people who were alive then would see before they died. They would see it, which indicated that it was something that you were actually going to be able to see physically and experience here. And then there were things that were taking place, changes that were occurring, altering the doctrine. And so John was writing about this and warning future generations that, hey, something's not right here. Something's happened. And yeah, don't be trouble. Red Scout. Exactly. So I'm thinking that instead of preparing for the worst, we should be preparing for the best. Now, how do we prepare for the best? How do we prepare to see this kingdom of heaven on earth? What do we do? Well, one thing that we can do is start out by planting our gardens, developing our orchards. That picture behind me, let me get out of the way so you can see it. That's a man and his wife in their particular orchard. That's a tangerine orchard in Vietnam. They look happy. That's potentially, actually, let me just get out of the way. That's potentially the future that we might have to look forward to there. I really didn't have anything at all prepared today. Can you tell? Red Scott says, treat everyone as yourself. There's that possibility that whenever, oh, hi, Kitty. I forgot to give you food, didn't I? I'm such a horrible master. Horrible. There's that possibility that as these troublesome events take place and unfold, that what comes afterwards is not a nightmarish existence like we have been looking at. Just a possibility. Sasspress says, Sasspress, I can't talk today. Sasspress Red says, I've met many chosen who have no eyes to see, no hearts of love, just hatred and fear. I know it. There's a lot of people out there that are fearful and they're prepping out of fear. They're not preparing for the better world. They're not preparing in the sense of doing what is necessary to bring that better world about. They're preparing to survive those worst of the trials and tribulations that are coming, right? I don't think that's the right approach. If we're already in that mindset where we're going to batten down the hatches, we're going to pull everything tight around ourselves, we're going to close the doors and shut everyone out and turn to our stashes of beans and rice and make sure that the firearms are loaded and things of that nature, then we're shutting the doors of possibility to that better world. before we get too far ahead. Fishes and Love's Life says many of the right words, but are also whitewashed tombs on here in religious circles. Oh yeah. Vicky's saying Osambu I cannot say that guy's name. Raised tangerines. His were the most flavorful and least expensive because he used no chemical inputs. Fishes and Lotus saying we just lost power. Interesting. This idea is something that needs to get out there. We need to be talking about it. So this year, I just finished planting the last of, well, maybe the last of the trees that we'll be planting on this particular property, this 3rd acre. Finally got all the trees in. And I'm going around in the backyard working on a different sort of a water system, one that should be able to take the water that we get every year from annual rainfall. And I just did this calculation. It's fun. This will be the next video coming out. I don't know if I'm going to have it out on Friday or maybe Monday. It just depends upon whether I've got it all edited together by then. I'm planning on calling it Water for Every Garden. Sort of a take on Percival Yeoman's Water for Every Farm. Well, this will be Water for Every Garden. I took the average rainfall that we get for where I'm at, and you can do this to put in average rainfall in your web browser. Open up a separate tab, type in average rainfall, and then put in your zip code. And because we live in such a wonderful time, your search engine can return to you the average rainfall that you're going to get for your zip code, where you're at, no matter where you're at in the world, or at least in North America. And here in northeastern Oklahoma, it's 41 inches on the average. And then you can do the same thing with the number of frost-free days, so you know how long your growing season is. Yes, Kitty. I'm sorry. I forgot to give you that extra food this afternoon. I know. So I did the calculations for where we live, and it's 28 and a half weeks. That's the number of weeks that we need to get on average 1 inch of rainfall. So 41 inches a year, we're getting plenty of water. Water is not a problem. The inconvenient thing is, or the thing that makes it a problem, is we don't get it at convenient times. And just before we get started here, well, just before, I was out there working on building another one of our gopher-proof beds, putting together a 20-foot long segment with the top rail on it. So we'll have a little bit more planting space. I want to get that done here in the next couple of days because I'd like to get some carrots started. And I don't want the gophers to have the carrots. I don't begrudge them a meal, but I don't want them eating my meal. But I was also working on editing the trailer for that particular piece. And I don't have all the bits and pieces together. It's just in the midst of editing. But I did a quick experiment where we take the garden hose and we spray it on the ground, and we spray it and spray it and spray it. And you can see the water starting to build up, because even if you have good porous soil that's going to allow water to infiltrate readily, it doesn't infiltrate during a hard rain event quickly enough for that water to go all the way down into the soil. A lot of it's going to sheet off. Now, if you have good ground cover, you don't lose a whole lot of your soil as the water sheets off the property, but it won't infiltrate in time. Some of that is going to wind up going off of your property unless you have dug trenches for the water to go into and infiltrate. Then you can keep it on the property. That's what the idea of swales is, and this is also the way we go about regreening the desert. Those little out of the way places where we can go and set up gardens and plant trees and vines and perennial plants and things like that, making that food system for the coming kingdom, right? Because people shouldn't have to starve. Well, after I'd hosed down the surface of the ground there with the grass, and we could see how the water built up, didn't penetrate through the roots quickly enough to soak into the ground and started sheeting off, I came back with a shovel and we dug down just a little bit and pulled out a divot. And I could see that we managed to get about 2 inches of infiltration from where we'd used the hose and washed the surface of the ground. But underneath that, the water hadn't infiltrated. And I was spraying it on pretty hard. So you can imagine what would happen whenever you get rainfall. Most of that water you're getting doesn't sink into the ground. But the technique that I've got coming up that we'll be showing in the next upcoming video will show you how to go about trapping that water, capturing it, keeping it on the ground and keeping it in the ground, and at the same time utilizing space that otherwise would be wasted, not only for your water, but also for access to the rest of your garden and as a place where you can do your composting. What else? Well, that's 3 things. 3 things should be enough. Let me check on the comments real quick here. Let's see. I think he's saying we were warned that we'd be forgiven as we forgave. And as Pastor says, I have spoken. I tried to see every one of the Creator's children, 2 legs, 4 feather, and a fin. I've got a kind of an interesting take on that. The way I look at it, that you're always going to have 2 camps, and generally, so there are people that think that everything is random chance, and that's how the universe, the visible universe that we get to experience, comes into existence. And then there are people that say that there's an intelligent design behind it. I do believe in intelligent design. Exactly what shape and form that takes, I can't say that my view is the right one or anyone else's is the right one. But I like to think of it as sort of a universal consciousness that suffuses all things. So, yeah, the little furry thing here is also a portion of that. Mary says, I heard a prepper on a podcast say he was more worried about his freezer than his pond. Oh, that sounds like Jack. That sounds like Jack. Keeping a freezer running requires electricity. A pond, if it's well put together, can go without circulating water for a period of time. As a matter of fact, there's some in-ground and even out-of-ground aquaponics or aquatic arrangements with sufficient plant life in them that they can filter out solids and supply oxygen. As long as they're not overstocked one way or the other, they can maintain themselves. My grandmother built one. It was a series of 3 tubs, and I believe those were the molasses tubs, the nutrient tubs that you use for feeding cattle. She had 3 of them, and they were about maybe 2.5, 3 foot deep or so, and about, I want to say about as wide as this and square. She had 3 of them set in a row down a slope. So that whenever one overflowed, it went to the next, went into the next, went into the next. And then finally it went out. She planted a small garden all the way around it with a magnolia tree to shade over everything. And she put goldfish in them. And then she and my grandfather wound up leaving the old farm and went out to Tahlequah, where they have a space on the Illinois River. And Granddad went fishing on the river for the rest of his life. He had retired from farming. He wasn't doing it anymore. He kept a little garden so he could grow his vegetables. He had his peach tree back there because he loved his peaches, and he went fishing. And about 20 years went by, and those ponds with the goldfish sat there on the property. It was rented out to a pastor and his family, and they didn't do really anything with the farm itself. They just stayed in the farmhouse. So the fields went fallow. The little garden got overgrown. Nobody was taking care of the fish. They weren't being fed. The water wasn't being circulated. Solids weren't being pulled out of the pond. None of that was taking place. 20 years went by. And then my mother got remarried, and her and her new husband had enough money together to go ahead and purchase that property from my grandmother. My grandfather passed on by this time. And we came back to the old farmhouse. I was 7 years old by then. and the goldfish were still in the pond, and they were thriving, completely and totally neglected. 20 years neglected, and everything was just fine, because the systems that were set up in that pond were capable of operating without interference from man. That's the kind of systems that I'm really desperately wanting to put together. The things that we can set up and then live with and benefit from. Okay. Carol says, to not be like that, putting extra burdens on those new to the faith who don't know Christ will be a start. This is one of the reasons why I don't really want to do a whole lot of theological talk. I might set some time aside to actually really get into it if people are interested. Hi, because I believe John was absolutely right. There was a problem very early on with doctrines being introduced that were contrary to the teachings of Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef. He did say it was coming. It's called A Drunkard and Mixed with Thieves, etc. There's kind of some interesting things there. When Jesus was talking about how he would come back, he said two really interesting things that kind of get overlooked in modern Christianity. One of them was, of course, if you hear someone say, "There he is," don't believe them. And if you hear somebody says, "Here I am," don't believe them. Now, those two things put together tell me something. They tell me, Kitty, they tell me that the return that people are looking for, it's not going to be something that you'll be able to see and recognize. So you're not going to see a man show up and be the Christ. That's not what you're going to see. It's not what it's going to look like. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I know it's not going to be that. Either that or Jesus was a liar. It's one or the other. John Pumphrey says, hello. Yeah, and going into doctrine and talking about that, says everyone has their own particular view on the things that they believe, and they're not always the same. Creates division, which makes me think that maybe this kingdom, if we're going to be seeking it, we might want to look at some more worldly foundations for it. For example, gardens. Mary says it wasn't Jack. Oh, it wasn't Jack. Okay. Farm pond, she says. Oh. All right. So, Jasper saying, Lords and war, always lords and lords and war. It's the interesting thing. If we're going to have this kingdom without an earthly king, at some point we're actually going to have to get away from the earthly kings, which means we'll need to be independent. How do we get independent? Well, part of that means we need to establish this thing that these two have right there. We need to be able to live without the money. If we have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, then we have to figure out a way to do without Caesar's system. This is what was happening very early on in the in the church before it became, I guess, what we call the Christian church. These were the followers of Rabbi Yeshua. They went outside of the town and they established communities. And they weren't using the monetary system. This caused a lot of trouble. That's the reason why Saul of Tarsus was so eager to do something about them. He was a young Pharisee, and in order to establish himself in the hierarchy, he had to do something to get himself noticed. So he went after this new sect, trying to make them. Eventually, he succeeded in transforming into something that was palatable to Rome. And John wrote about it. All right, Fish's Low says, the elites give us the tower. God have mercy and confuse them. Oh, that's Tower of Babel. Right. He says, of course the goldfish were thriving. They're colored carp and they're tough. It is really hard to kill goldfish. I mean, really hard. Between the cricket and the cat. Scott says, did someone say Jesus? Yes, indeed. I think we need to go back and open those books again and start looking a bit more closely at the teachings of Jesus. Perhaps maybe believe him a bit more. And he says, Mark and I just talked about that the other day. So we have our gardens, right? We have this really, really old system where we plant these trees. Not just trees, but everything else too. And they produce. They produce abundantly. They require tending, of course. This is the original purpose of man, is to tend the garden. That's why we're here. I would assume that the Creator makes man to tend the garden, puts man in the garden, and never says, hey, I changed my mind. I don't want you to tend the garden anymore. So we've been running around for thousands of years doing anything else but tending the garden. And we wonder why we have troubles. We're not fulfilling our purpose on earth. We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And if you imagine that if every person goes out, takes the piece of land in front of them, begins designing, building the garden, or building a garden that will work where they're at, they focus their attention and their energy on it. You build this to the point where, yes, it begins to feed you. It feeds you and it feeds more to the point where you have an abundance. The people that are in need, you have food to give to them. Many of the problems that come along with the modern society go Yes, Kitty? Yeah? Yeah? If I'm busy tending my garden, then I'm not busy going over and attacking my neighbor and taking what belongs to my neighbor. Mary says, was it working the soil of punishment? I don't really think so, no. I think the working the soil and doing garden building, replenishing the earth was always part of the original plan. We start out in the garden that God makes, right? So we get to see what it looks like. This is the blueprint. This is the design. Everything works together synergistically. It maintains itself. It does require someone to tend it to get the productivity out of it. Now, whenever we go forth out of this garden into the world to replenish the world, to build it, we know what we're supposed to be doing. Except then we didn't. Humans didn't. So mankind had to struggle. And it was not intended to be that kind of a struggle. Well, Scott, I'm thinking about something, and what I'm thinking about is the natural state and natural condition of man. If we are in the natural state and natural condition, then those things that are part of the natural state and natural condition, they're natural. They're not unusual. They're normal. It's only whenever we start thinking of, well, this hurts and I don't want the hurt. Or how should I put this? The thorns were always there. The snake was already there. All of these things were always in the garden, but they are part of the whole. We started noticing that this is bad, or this is unpleasant. We don't like this unpleasant thing. Let's avoid this unpleasant thing. Let's remove it from the equation if we can. So we get rid of the bee and its sting. You get rid of the bee and its sting, well, you also got rid of the pollinator. You get rid of the snake in the garden because he's got the fangs and sometimes poison. You get rid of that because this is bad. This is bad. We know when now the rats come in, and there's nothing to keep the rats in check. So all of these parts being part of the whole, part of the natural state, if they're accepted as being part of the natural state, made perfect, made good, then they can't necessarily be bad. But we started dividing them, and whenever we divided them and didn't accept the whole picture, that's whenever the trouble started. Mary's saying, I thought it meant that the plow is punishment. The punishment is, well, okay. So I don't really believe in a God that punishes, for starters. The reason is if there's the creator who creates man, then the creator knows man. If the creator knows man, then the creator knows that punishment doesn't exactly work. Yeah, you can threaten with punishment, you can punish, and you can alter behavior, but you don't alter the character of the person through punishment. What do you do whenever you're threatened with punishment? You try to avoid the punishment. This is the problem, right? And Scott's saying Genesis 3 says the ground became cursed and decayed, and the nature of work changed. There is that. And I think the reason why the nature of work changed and the reason why the ground became cursed is because of the way man was interacting with the world around him. He stopped interacting with nature as a whole and started going, well, we don't want this thing. I don't want this. I don't want that. We're going to pick and choose the parts that we want instead of accepting all of it as the entire package. And that's whenever the problems begin. That's whenever you start seeing the brambles pop up, the unpleasant things abound. This happens in agriculture, right? We take the plow out, we strip the cover off the soil. We plant one crop in there, just one, and we create an unnatural system. It's not the way nature works. It's not the way the garden was designed. The garden was not designed to have just one crop growing in rows. It's not the way the garden was designed. The garden was designed to have an abundance of different things coming up together, each one balancing the other to create a whole. So when mankind started tilling, planting in rows, planting monocultures, and creating a less natural system, the ground rebelled, became cursed, so to speak. So part of the trick here is to figure out how to accept what we are inclined to think of as being bad and see it through new eyes. To see it through eyes of accepting that this is part of the overall design and that the overall design is good. It means you have to trust in the creator. Trust is a key factor. Now, Rabbi Yeshua was talking about trust when he was spreading the good news of the kingdom. He said some things on that nature, particularly regarding children. He said, unless you become like these children, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. What is he talking about? What's the nature of a child? The child has to trust those around him or her. The child is dependent on those around him or her. You have to let go of the idea that you can control your circumstances and trust. Until you're willing to do that, you can't enter into the kingdom of heaven. This is one of the reasons why it's very hard for the wealthy to get into the kingdom of heaven. Because whenever you have large amounts of wealth and your thoughts are on your wealth and how you can preserve it, maintain it, grow it, protect it from people that are going to try to take it away from you, you can't have trust. You can't let go of the illusion of control. You never really had it. You had the illusion. You can't let go of that illusion of control and open yourself up to trust. And since you have that seed of mistrust, fear, paranoia, you can't even see the kingdom, even though it's right in front of you. And he says, I have to run, but I'll be back to finish listening to the replay. Yay. Yeah, it's getting dark out there. Got about half an hour to go. Yeah, it's already dark outside. So we'll start doing these out there in the grape arbor pretty soon. Sometimes it's hard to accept that snake is supposed to be there, right? So at the moment, I've got a gopher problem. And I've been doing all kinds of things, struggling, working, scratching my hands up on hardware cloth and doing things to keep the gopher from eating my sweet potatoes, my carrots, and my onions. Well, maybe it's not a gopher problem I have, but it's not enough snakes. Perhaps if I had enough snakes, or if I had the right snakes, those would keep the gophers in check. I could turn a dog loose in the garden, let the dog run around, it'd tear up the ground. That would be a problem, wouldn't it? Having all my nice, pretty little garden beds ripped up by the dog, but the dog would go after the gophers, chase the gophers off. The neighbor's got geese. He doesn't have any gopher problems. One of those gophers pops his head up. There's a goose picking at it right off the bat. So they abandoned his yard. But all he has is geese and grass, and that's about it. Right, says Windows 10 didn't like that. I'm eating a ham sandwich with horsey sauce now. Wow, that sounds nice. Hawks, yeah, hawks are nice. Of course, I have so many trees overhead that it's hard for the hawks to see. It's hard for them to get down and get to the gophers. And they only poke their heads up every now and then. Heterodox says, prairie king snakes here. They winter in the compost piles along with the voles. There we go. I think king snakes would probably do a pretty good job of eliminating the rats and the gopher firecrackers, really. And ferrets might take care of the gophers. Ferrets, it's kind of hard to come by a ferret that I can just turn loose that would come back. Maybe I need to create a habitat for ferrets. Habitats for ferrets, habitats for snakes. The hawks aren't a problem. They're flying around all the time. I found out recently that herons like gophers as well, oddly enough. But if I want to attract herons, I need to do something. I need to alter the landscape just a little bit. I need to provide them with standing water, with surface water. And then I can have heron come in. And the herons will hunt gophers for me. Guardian Prepping says, hey, Jason. Guardian Prepping. Hey, that little shield icon I see there, that looks familiar. You're from South Africa, correct? If I'm not mistaken. Brian says, yeah, put an M60 in the hole. Yay, new member. Thank you very much for joining. Appreciate it. I suppose I could set off some firecrackers in the gopher holes. Heterodox says, I have blue herons. They spear the crappie when the pond overflows. I've seen them flying overhead, but they haven't stopped yet. So right now, this time of year, I'm seeing a lot of crows, a lot of blue jays, quite a few hawks that are hunting the tree line over there across the way from me, and Citizen Guardian. Okay, that's what I thought. That shield icon looked familiar. And we have eagles flying across too. Mary says it's probably the same bird, but I've seen it 3 or 4 times now, flying overhead, and usually low enough that you can really, really tell that that's not just a buzzard. That's the national buzzard with his bald head and white tail feathers. But they nest over there on the other side of the river. We're on the here where the river makes a little bend, and we're on the north side of the bend. On the south side of the bend, there's a cliff. So if we have flooding, it's coming over on this side. But up there on that cliff, there are lots of trees that are inaccessible, hard to get to, and that's where the birds have their nests. Right now, I don't have a lot of trees that are suitable for eagles to nest in. Maybe that sycamore over there. That way. No, that way. I'm backwards. When I'm pointing this way, I'm pointing to the west. There's a sycamore to the west that's tall enough. I don't know if it's going to get eagles in. Maybe a hawk might make a nest up there. But they like to be sort of high up and isolated. Heterodox says, blackbirds here were here early. I saw a number had died untouched the last couple of weeks. It's hard to say what's happening to them. I mean, there's avian flu that can happen, and they, depending upon the type of blackbird, a lot of them like to form these really dense flocks, so they can wind up spreading disease amongst themselves pretty readily. Not the way some other birds that we have go. Recently, I saw grackles and regular blackbirds and starlings. Those are all on the move now. And I try to run the grackles away because they've got the Walmart parking lot. They can go and they can scavenge there. They don't need to eat the food out of the bird feeder. But part of that preparation, we're preparing for the birds to have a place. We're giving them the surface water. We're giving them the shelter. We're giving them food whenever they need it. And those birds in turn come in and they take care of things for me. Things like eating the insects. You know, birds have to eat insects. It's not they can. They have to. Whenever a baby bird is in its nest, it can't go out and get a drink of water. it has to rely upon what its parent brings it, either the mother or the father or both, depending upon the species. In some cases, you'll have, like, for example, black-capped chickadees. The mother will stay in the nest with the young until they're ready to fly. And the father will go out and he'll bring the insects. He'll gather insects. And he doesn't bring grain, he brings bugs. Now, a couple of weeks ago, before the bugs were really emerging, the chickadees were coming around and they're visiting the bird feeder and they're eating sunflowers and safflowers. And I've got some millet and other things in there. That's what they're eating. And they're eating that because that's all there is. They're surviving on that. Little oil-bearing seeds and grains. But now that the bugs are out and they're running around, they're looking for places to build their nests. And I set up a couple of birdhouses there for them. Hopefully a family or two of those are finches or wrens. We'll find those birdhouses and start trying to build a nest. We'll know here about 1 more month or so, I guess, if they're going to go in there and they're going to build. Hopefully they will. I've had the houses set up since fall, so there's been enough time for them to see them and check them out. We'll see if that develops into a flock of little insectivores for me. All right, so the baby birds are in the nest. And the father is coming in with a beak full of bugs for him. And he'll pass that off to the mother bird. And she'll eat some too, because she's staying in there with the chicks to watch over them, guard them, keep them warm. And she'll feed the insects to the chicks. So the chicks can't get out and get a drink of water. They can't go visit the bird bath. So those insects, in addition to being high in protein, they also have the moisture that the young need. So they have to eat the insects. It's the way that the birds gets the moisture to the chicks. Arkansas was I cannot ask if I'm dual streaming. I should be. I don't know if it's going to show up automatically on Rumble or not. Either it's dual streaming onto Rumble or it'll appear on Rumble as soon as we finalize here. One of the two, I suppose. I don't know. If somebody wants to check Rumble and see if the stream is happening on Rumble simultaneously or not. I didn't set up StreamYard to automatically stream to Rumble because I noticed that if I post a video to Rumble separately, then it'll show up twice and I'll have to go back and delete one of them. So anyway, Red Scout says lots of strange things happening at the moment. Not really so strange. Part of the plan, I would say. We have to have these things happen, right? The wars, the rumors of wars, the incidents occurring in various places, the famines, the collapses of the monetary system. Because so long as we're still tied to Caesar's systems, we can't really operate in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, Desert Eden Bloom says, I don't see you live on Rumble. Okay, so it's going to show up on Rumble afterwards. You can say, I don't understand why some people say they eat like a bird to describe a delicate appetite. Baby birds eat 3 times their weight a day. And most birds do eat a lot every day. I'm surprised that whenever I fill up those bird feeders that they don't get emptied out within an afternoon. But I stock some pretty calorie dense food in there, the sunflowers and the safflowers. And I think I'm going to start putting peanuts in there as well. For a bit, I was putting cat food in because I noticed that the wrens would come in and they'd come into the porch where I've got a little dish of food for the outdoor kitty, the gopher hunter who doesn't hunt gophers anymore. And the wrens would come up onto the porch and they'd eat the cat food out of the dish on the porch. And if I didn't have any cat food on the porch and I was sitting out on the porch just enjoying the shade and enjoying the day and relaxing, occasionally a wren would come up and he'd land on the railing and he'd look at me and He'd make a little noise like, not annoy Mary here. Something like that, right? But more of a, see if we can do this right. I need some rosin on this. Anyway, he'd make this little noise, and he'd look at me, and he's talking. He's trying to communicate with me. And I was like, well, what do you want? I'm looking around, and I didn't quite get it. When I first had one come up and do this, I didn't quite understand. What is it you're trying to tell me? You're trying to tell me something I can tell. And then he flew off. And eventually I figured out what it was. He was trying to say, hey, where's my food? Where's the food that you put out for us? Because it's, it's early in the year, the bugs aren't out, and we need lots of protein. Red Scott says, love spent correctly is time, not money. Yeah, indeed. Well, time, energy. I would much rather have a portion of everyone's energy than a portion of everyone's money. Right? You can get a lot more accomplished with energy than money. Desert Union Bloom says, just subscribe to Rumble. I'd like to remind everyone that we're on a borrowed time here, so it might be a wise idea to sub over his channel at Rumble. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I went over there. It's like, I don't know. I'm going to try to avoid being too incredibly controversial. There's ways to go about saying the things that I want to say without kicking the hornet's nest too much. But sometimes if you're going to say the truth, there will be people that just aren't going to tolerate it. And they'll try to shut you down. Greg Allison was saying he's noticed that he's not seeing push notifications, even though he's subscribed. He's got the bell icon clicked. He's just not seeing them. They don't show up. So I don't know whether it's shadow banning, something like that. I'm just saying too many things that people don't like. Weird stuff like, XX is female, XY is male, and there's only two sexes. Obnoxious things like that. Vicky says, suet is a favorite of carnivore and insectivore birds, calorie dense. Yeah. And I would do suet, but you got to get that fat from somewhere. I'm thinking about giving them peanuts, though. Not these peanuts, which are salted, but I've got some over here. Did I show you last week? I showed you the peanuts I started in trays. I'm going to increase a lot of peanuts there. Guardian, no science, brother. Thanks. Sometimes I talk science, but I don't really want to go up against woke culture. It seems like a waste of time. These people are set in their minds about what they believe, and I don't think we're going to be able to convince them. Anyway, let's see here. Let's see. What have I got? Right outside the frame. Yeah, there you go. Spare wire for that project. Here we go. Yeah, the invisible bull. Check this out. Woohoo! All right. So I've got the peanuts in here. This is from last year. Yeah, quite a few peanuts last year. And I planted a bunch, and I still have some left over. This next harvest, I should have enough that I can actually start feeding peanuts that we grew in the yard to the birds, and we'll have some for myself, too. Use the oil press to get the peanut oil out of it, and we can take that press cake and put that out there for the little birds. Vicky's saying, unfortunately, there are mutations caused by chemicals and pollution that have messed up chromosomes. Oh, boy. To a certain extent. But frogs have always been able to alter their gender based upon population. It's interesting interesting characteristic of that particular segment of amphibians being able to, if there's too many males, they can change. If there's too many females, they can change. Brian saying, "What's up, Jason?" Ceiling, sky, clouds, chirping birds, airplanes. Oh, you mean what are we up to? Arkansas Cutter says, "Will there be gender beyond?" Well, if we were reading in the Bible and looking at the words of Rabbi Yeshua, there was a particular question that was asked. I'm sorry, I don't have the chapter and verse memorized, but it's in those first 4 New Testament books. He was asked a question regarding a woman who was married to a man. He died. As was custom, she married the brother. He died. She married the next brother in line. He died. And the question is, well, who will she be with when she arrives in heaven? And the answer that was given is another clue as to that difference between having an ego consciousness and being corporeal and being spirit. And it appears that if I'm interpreting what the rabbi is saying properly, that the only thing that ascends to heaven is that which descended, meaning only that divine conscious spirit descended. That goes back again, and that is not the same as the ego consciousness that the individual has while one is living on earth. So it doesn't matter because at that point, the only thing that's there is the divine consciousness, not the separate being. But that separate being, me, you, everyone else, are always present because the divine consciousness is always present and we're always a part of that. It's always a part of us. If I'm interpreting that correctly, and I might not be, simply because we've had multiple translations of the texts over time, and I don't think all the people who are doing the translations were necessarily trying to be faithful with their translations. Even the ones that were trying to be faithful with their translations are prone to trying to make what's written there match what the current doctrine is. So if you have a choice of the word that you're going to use, you use a word that fits the current doctrine, not necessarily one that is a literal translation of what was said. And literal translations from one language to the other don't necessarily always carry over either. We have colloquial speech. There's the way that we say things in one language, which doesn't really translate to another language. So it may be hard to fully reconstruct everything that was being given in Rabbi Yeshua's sermons, simply because of things getting lost in translation. But I do think it's interesting that the teachings of Rabbi Yeshua are quite a bit different from modern church doctrine. We'll put it that. So anyway, what should we be preparing for? Well, we should be preparing for a day whenever we're not living under the thumb of the Caesar, not necessarily the Roman. Anyway, a day whenever we have no government. It's really interesting. I know I'm an awful preacher. If you go back in the text, way back, we're talking Old Testament here. I know not everybody has this copy. There was a time whenever the Israelites didn't have a king. I believe this is in Was it First Samuel? Am I mistaken? It's in First Samuel. No king. Now they had elders. They had people who studied Torah. They had all that. But it was still tribal organization. No king. And oddly enough, everything was working just fine. But the people said, hey, look, everybody around us, they have kings. We want to be like everybody else. We want a king too. And Samuel, who was a prophet at the time, says, hey, look, guys, you don't want a king. Because if you get a king, let me tell you what he's going to be like. He's going to be like every other king out there. He's going to take the best of your crops for himself. He's going to take your young men. He's going to take your young women to serve in his court, to serve in the armies. In his armies, he's going to send them off into warfare. He's going to get them killed. He's going to invite neighbors to come in and invade the lands. It's going to be a mess. You're not going to like it. And they said, no, we want the king. We want the king. And eventually Samuel relented. He anointed a king for them. But the message was there for us. You don't want kings. You don't want these people who are in positions of rulership over you, because that's not the way the power structure is supposed to work. The way the power structure is supposed to work is like this. You have nature, or nature's God, depending upon your belief system. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. If it's not breaking my leg or picking my pocket, I don't care whether you have one God or 10,000. This is the top rank of your power structure. From there, the power goes to man. Hi, me, you, everyone else. We're all equal on this playing field. In other words, the power goes from the creator to the man or woman. From there, in order for us to interact with each other as equals, we create law, which serves us. Law serves man, not the other way around. So it's creator, man, law is under man. Law is made to serve man. And then we have people that we set up to uphold and enforce law. This is servants of the law, right? Creator, man, law, servants of the law down here at the bottom. At the bottom. Now, whenever you have a king, and maybe you don't have a king. Maybe you say, oh, we're going to get rid of kings. We're going to have a president instead, a chancellor, a prime minister, whatever you want to call that person who is in charge of your government. And then the associated things that go along with it, the bureaucracy. It inverts the power structure. The servant now comes up on top. What happened to the God? Gone. Servant's here. Law is under because he makes the law. And man now has to serve under the law. This is entirely wrong. It's not the natural state of man. It's not the way we're supposed to live. Oh, let's see. There you go. Mark wants a chicken leg. Hey, Mark, you're actually here tonight. That's cool. Vicky's saying, I think we've lost a great deal of the original teaching in the service of current doctrine. Oh, yeah, definitely. It's still there, and you can reconstruct it. I might really have to do a segment where we actually go and I can pull out the text and show it to you. And it's hard to reconstruct, though. But I have noticed, and I noticed this when I was very little. I learned how to read when I was 7 years old, I think it was. And every time we went into church, we went and visited a whole bunch of them, I'd sit down and I'd pick up the Bible and I'd start reading it because it's something to read, and I loved reading. And I'd be listening while I'm reading because I can use my visual processing to read what's on the page and use my auditory processing to hear what's being said. And I can do both at the same time. So while the sermon was going on, I'd be reading along in the book. And the pastor would say, okay, turn to this chapter, this person, he's going to read a sentence. Okay, now turn to this other chapter and this other verse. And I was like, wait, I'm continuing to read, and I read before and I read after, and I can do this quickly because I'm speed reading. It's like, wait a minute. The case that you're making is completely out of context with this line here. You're just taking this line and using it to reinforce this idea of doctrine that you're trying to impart to us. But if I read the full text, that's not what this is about. You're trying to pull a fast one on us here. I got in trouble and invited not to come back to Sunday school a couple of times. Because saying the power structure is that he was king. There were priests, but no secular rulers. All right. So if we're going to have the kingdom of heaven, then we have the heavenly king, who is not a man on earth. No secular rulership. There's the creator. There's the God. Then there's the man, which is you, me, everyone else. This is the power structure. So, yes. Some people say we're called to be kings and priests. Yeah, sort of. You can have other rulers, I suppose, under the one king, right? This is the power structure in, or it used to be the power structure in Malaysia. There was a sultanate. Right, guys, what an interesting story. Sometime look up the Sultan of Brunei, Brunai, I believe it's called, and that's an interesting story. The entire region had a sultan who was in charge of all of the people, but all the little tiny kingdoms that made up the entire overall kingdom each had their own separate ruler. And typically, it would be the sultan would appoint one of his sons to rule over an area. But in the case of the Sultan of Brunei, the son that ordinarily would have become ruler of Brunei was not a good fit for a ruler. But there was an Englishman that came and fell in love with the land, fell in love with the people, and the Sultan decided, I want this guy to take over and rule this particular sultanate, the Sultan of Brunei. And so he appointed this Englishman to be the new Sultan of Brunei. And the Queen back in England goes all ecstatic. She's like, "Oh, great! Now we can conduct these wonderful trade agreements because he's effectively a part of the British Kingdom." And he said, "No, Brunei is not part of England. It's its own independent kingdom, and I'm the Sultan. So you have to treat with me as if you're dealing with another head of state." The Queen was not happy about this, but the people of Brunei were ecstatic because they had a ruler that loved the land and loved them, loved their culture, and wasn't going to abuse his position of authority. Anyway, but that's all about that flow of power structure coming from the creator, the king, to the man. The law is created, and then you have people serving the law underneath that. Brian says, "I obey law." John says, placing people before the law. What a concept. Well, if the law does not serve the people, then who does it serve? Right? It serves a ruling class. And that's what we have in the world today. Just about everywhere in the world today is law serving a ruling class, and the people are subject to the law. That's not the right power structure. Henry Doc says, "Be careful, because if he has questions, they'll kick you out of Sunday school." You had an experience like that too, huh? Yeah, sometimes. But I was reading along, and I would go ahead and read the entire segment in context. And whenever I saw something that didn't match up with what was actually in the scripture, I was like, "Hey, wait a minute! This is unsupported doctrine." Oh, it's supported. Look, you have to look over here and over here and over here and over here to all these things that aren't connected except they're in the same book. And that means this. Well, no, it doesn't. I don't know where you got this idea. Have you been listening to Saul again? He's got you convinced that the kingdom of heaven is a place that you go whenever you die. But that would make Jesus a liar, see? So either Jesus was telling the truth or Jesus was a liar. It's one of those two. And if Jesus was telling the truth, then the kingdom of heaven is here. It's now. It's on earth. And you'll see it before you die. All right. John's saying, solving problems without the law getting involved. Well, this is one of the reasons why we have, why we create law, or we create convention. And it's common law. It's common law between us. These are the things that we agree on, so we function as a society. It's a framework that allows us to coexist peacefully without conflict. And it all starts out from that proper power structure, right? We're equals. I don't have greater status than you have, so on and so forth. Mark's taking off. Hi, Mark. Okay. Brian's got to go turn his oven on. And Vicky says, there's only one king. The rest of us are stewards under him. Agreed. Yep. There's saying the story of Lot and his daughters gets truncated. The story of Lot and his daughters is a weird one, right? And Mary has her take on it. She says that this is one of those just so stories that they tell the tale of how after the fall of Sodom, Lot and his two daughters are together, and they get him drunk and do some hanky panky, and they have kids from their dad. And she's saying that's done to explain why this group of people we don't like so much, because they're, that particular tribe came about through incest. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know why this story is told that way. Vicky's saying the kingdom is within us, not separate. Very good. I mean, that's it. You have to find that the kingdom within. If you don't find it, I was trying to get Mary to watch 6 Days and 7 Nights, or 7 Days and 6 Nights, the film with Harrison Ford and Anne Hesh in it. It came up on I think it was on Netflix. I was trying to get her to watch it whenever she was home the last couple of days. So there's a line in there where Harrison Ford says, "It's an island, sweetheart. If you don't bring it with you, you're not going to find it here." And I just love that line. But if you can't find contentment and happiness within yourself, you aren't going to find it anywhere else. Seeking after it will only lead you to misery, and it'll lead everybody else into misery too, because they have to put up with you. Well, looks like everybody's taken off. It is past 1 hour in. So going forward, try not to be afraid. Try not to be worried about the things going on about you. You've got a job to do, which is to plant the garden, to tend the garden, and every bit of land around you, everything that you see, that's one more piece of the garden for you to work on and to develop. Whether you're planting tangerines like this lovely couple behind me there and enjoying your time here, or whatever else it is that you're doing, try to go forward and every day prepare a little bit more for the coming kingdom and to be a part of it. And remember, whenever you have the opportunity to get out from underneath the improper power structure of servant's law you under, and go back to the proper power structure of nature or nature's God, man, law, and if we need them, people to uphold the law, that's where we want to go. Now, that is an anarchist system, but that's the reason I'm an anarchist. It's the right thing to do. Vicky's saying Lot's daughters thought that they were the only remnant. Okay, yeah. and we're trying to continue the species. I suppose if you saw something that cataclysmic, that would have been something. And you would think, well, that's it. The world has ended. Let's keep in mind, the end of the world is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of the new world. And the new world is going to be a good one because you're in it. And so I will look forward to seeing all of you next time. Thank you for joining me tonight. If you found the video informative or entertaining, well, you know what to do. I will have that new video coming out. Water for Every Garden is the title. I think you're going to enjoy it. I've been doing a lot of physical work on it. There is a bunch of that toiling away to set it up. But once it's all done, I think we'll see that it works out very, very well. Jan Penland's in here. Thanks, Jason. Much love. Thanks. And I will catch you all next time. Yes, Kitty, I'm going to feed you.